Good morning and welcome to my very first podcast, Workplace with Gwen. With me, Gwemo Susie Hemba. I'm an industrial and organizational psychologist by training, which means I look at issues pertaining to the worker in a work setting. You may then ask, what is industrial and organizational psychology? Industrial and organizational psychology is a branch of psychology that studies people's behavior in work settings. Generally, it just means we use psychological theories and principles to change or modify work behavior. Sometimes people tend to mix us up with HR. HR does some aspects of IO psychology, which is industrial and organizational psychology. However, the difference is that we are scientists, so we use scientific methods to be able to come to a logical conclusion. Some of our methods, you may ask, what are they? We start by looking at the research problem. Like in an organization, we start by having a needs assessment. We say, okay, what are the needs of this organization? How do we go about meeting these needs? So we start from there. Then we go down to getting a hypothesis, which is an intellectual guess as to what is causing this problem. So we now have your hypothesis. We go ahead to now look at our research designs. How do we go about to have experimental methods for this? When we get our methods, we now go ahead to gather data. We gather data, then we analyze this data. When we analyze the data, we can now interpret the results, and the results of what we find is what we then apply in the work settings. So we use this to say it's a whole process out there to be able to come to a conclusion that by doing this and this, we can arrive at what we want to achieve. So, what are our functions? Some of our functions are just they're mirrored anyway. However, we're going to look at basic employee selection and placement, where we select people that are needed for the organization. We see where they're better suited in the organization, and then we put them there. We look at employee development, which is manpower development, by way of training, so that they could be highly skilled and be able to be applicable and have the skill set that is needed for that job. Then we look at other issues, worker issues that has to do with motivation. We look at leadership styles. We look at communication in the workplace. We look at punitive measures, which is a way to discipline employees who are found to have erred in the workplace. So there are a myriad of them. We're going to look at them over time. We're going to look at the history of industrial and organizational psychologies. Where did it start from? And the advancements we've made, all from the ages up to now. However, today we're going to focus on something different today, which is very special to me, because today, as we know, is the 8th of March, and it's a very wonderful day for me. Yay! And for all women out there, by the way, it's the day of the International Women's Day, and we know that what we are looking for is to break this bias. And the theme for this year is equality now for a sustainable tomorrow. So basically, I'm going to look at the talk today on equity, equality, as well as bias. I'm going to try to understand this today and see how we're going to have our own role to play, because everybody has a role to play in the workplace. So as an industrial and organizational psychologist, I'm going to base it in the work settings, that we'll see how to better help people, women in particular, in the workplace. So what is this whole International Women's Day about? It's something that started for a long time now. It's been up to 100 years since 1911. That was when the first International Women's Day gathering came about, and it started from women agitating for inclusion, for better working conditions at the workplace. So from 1908 in the United States, about 15,000 women staged a protest. We're like, we need you to look into this, because lots of women work for jobs that they're even better qualified than their male counterparts, and they are not being paid a commensurate wage. So by doing this, they started bringing more awareness to the issues of women in the working environment. Then they moved on in 1909. They observed the United States on February 28th. They observed the first International Women's Day. That's what it was called first, on the last Sunday, all until on the last Sunday of February, all up to 1913. However, the time we chose the date, March 18th, was at the 1910 at the 1910 at the Working Women's Conference in Copenhagen, when a woman by name Clara Zetkin gave this idea, had this ingenious idea, that why don't all women come together and say, let's choose a date that we can celebrate our successes, we can come together and look at our challenges and see how we can overcome them. So of course, these women were over 100 from 17 countries agreed with her idea, Clara's idea, and that was how the date March 8th came about. If you want to know more about this, the history of Women's Day, you can go ahead and look at their website at internationalwomensday.com. So, looking at this year's theme, however, one thing we should look at is that Women's Day have always had a theme, and it started from 1975, when we said, okay, we should look at a theme so that it's something we could work towards for the woman in the workplace. And not just workplace anyway, it could be anywhere. I might be partial to workplace because I'm an IO psychologist. So now the theme for this year is gender equality. So what is gender equality, you may ask? Gender equality is when people are treated equally across board, irrespective of their gender. So we know that gender equality has not been achieved by women yet, because women get discriminated against based just on the basis alone of their gender, of their sex. That I'm a woman is enough that someone would look at me and then question my ability, question my ability to do this work, question my existence even in this organization, which is really bad. And that is where the bias is coming, and we're saying break this bias. What then is bias? Bias is a prejudice, that is a feeling which is mostly negative towards another person. When you have this feeling that, okay, I favor this person, I'll not favor this other person based on different reasons, that is a bias. Biases, they abound everywhere. Perhaps we can't do without biases, because they're everywhere. There are all types of bias. We have the racial bias, we have the ethnic bias, we have the social bias, we have political bias, we have the socio-economic bias. There are types of biases based on even height, based on weight. All sorts of biases abound out there. However, I'm going to be looking at three. And first of all, we're going to look at the implicit or unconscious bias. What is implicit bias? Implicit bias or unconscious bias are those biases that we have inside of us. It's innate, it's intrinsic. It's something that we've acquired over time by looking at societal cues. Sometimes people grow up in an environment where things are being repeated over and over and over, which could be cultural, which could be religious, and then they internalize it. It becomes a part of them. And then unconsciously they have this bias. But however, when they grow up, when they have better knowledge about certain things, they might change their minds. That's not what they believe in. But unconsciously, the bias is still in them. So it just tends to come out from nowhere. So if a guy, a male child, for instance, grows up in an organization, in a society, whereby he's looked at women all his lives as a weaker sex, as someone who is not as intelligent, as someone who is not supposed to be doing certain things, and he grows up to see that it is not true. This is basically not true. I've been in class with girls. I've seen that girls do better sometimes in schoolwork. Girls can achieve this and I can achieve that, and he disagrees with that notion. He may still have his implicit bias there, which means that when he now comes to his work setting and he's looking at a number of applicants, he's going through these applications, unconsciously he might decide to be picking males over females. That is what implicit bias means. It means that it's something that's uncontrollable sometimes. It just crops up. It's like an instinct for him because he has had it internalized. So his ability to change that now has to be a conscious effort that he will make to change that bias. So the second bias we're going to look at now is the explicit or conscious bias. What does this mean? It means that it's something that is consciously internalized, something that is consciously learned. You have something that is being told to you and you have it in your consciousness. Then you now capitalize on it, and then you decide to go ahead and believe it and stick with this bias. You now say, okay, women are weaker sex, and I believe that. I agree with that. And then when you go out in your daily life, everywhere you see a woman, you just go ahead and have this bias against her. You go ahead and say, okay, no, you can't do this, you can't do that because you're a woman, because I'm a man, I'm better suited for this. You go ahead and play out your biases. That is explicit bias. It's something that is controllable anyway, because you've learned it and you can decide to unlearn it if you want to, if you so wish. The last type of bias we're going to be looking at today is confirmation bias. And that is a bias that's mainly studied by we psychologists, and we look at this as confirmation bias because it is something, as I said, we are scientists, so it is something that we look for proof, something that we go ahead to say, this confirms my belief. For example, you have explicit bias, then you go ahead to look for reasons as to support your claim. You are looking at women as weaker sex, and then you go ahead to give examples of where women have failed. You give examples of where you feel a woman wasn't suited for this job, and then you hold on to it and say, this is my proof. That's my proof. Women are not good for this job. And then you hold on to it. So that is confirmation bias, which might not be true, by the way. Of course, there are always differences. There are always a difference in the whole scenario. It mustn't always be the way we are looking at it. Some women might not be good, true. Some women might not be suited for the job, true. However, does that mean all women are not suited for the job? That is where your confirmation bias is wrong. So how then do we bring equality in the workplace? And as I've stated on before, biases bring inequality. Because we have a bias which is mainly negative, it means that you're going to bring a negative attitude towards a woman in the workplace. It means that during your hiring and selection phase, from the get-go, a woman doesn't stand a chance as a man. When you see her name on her resume, on her CV, you already have a bias against her. When you now go further to look, oh, she's married, oh, she has children, you have another bias. You feel she won't be well suited for that job because she's going to also be a mother, going to also have to go for the hospital runs, school runs, or different things. So we do have a bias against her. Then we look at inequality too, in terms of positions women occupy in offices. Generally, women occupy far less positions of power or authority in the organization than their male counterparts. Whether or not they are suited doesn't matter. Most companies want to have a male figure. They feel a man has his feeling of dominance, confidence, and that is what they want the company to project. So even though a woman might be good, she might even work twice as hard and be burnt out, but they might choose her male colleague over her. So that is where this inequality comes in. Inequality also comes in terms of wage. So you see women and men are working on the same grade, are working on the same issues. However, the male is better paid than his female counterpart. What brings up this wage disparity? Wage disparity, it happens everywhere. We look at it in sports, we look at it in journalism, we look at it in the medical field. Many practitioners, many organizations, I'll give it to them, are trying to have this divide, to bring it together so that they don't have these differences again. However, many haven't caught up to it. Now, one thing that struck me about International Women's Day when I was going through their website was that even though we have come a long way in this fight for women, for equality, for equity, we have recorded some progresses, yes. We have women in good positions of power, yes. We have women, female astronauts. We have female heads of states or prime ministers. We have women in political spaces. True. However, we have still not gone far enough. And the part that really touched me was that I said there that maybe for the next 100 years, which means in my lifetime, in our children's lifetime, we might never see them if where we have a situation where we have equality across board for male and females, and that saddened me. As a mother, I felt perhaps it might not happen in my time, but in my children's time that will happen. And the answer to this is no. Well, I want to say that the answer could be yes, if we work together to make this happen. And this means even our male counterparts have to also come together to help us to break these biases that exist. And biases are one of the reasons, are one of the bedrocks for why inequality still exists. Can you look at changing your mindset? Can you look at changing these biases that you have? Perhaps you may be proven wrong. Many women are doing things out there in the workplaces. If given the chance, if given equal opportunities, I believe women can even do better. So, I think it's time for us to reflect on this. Let's look for a way to join hands together now to change gender inequality for a sustainable tomorrow, because women bring a lot to the fore. If we're having children, we are also increasing the population. Without women, basically the population would die. So will a woman having a child cost her opportunity at work when she's also good enough, when she could also do it? Women multitask a lot. Women have a lot to offer. Women play a huge role for society, for organizations. And as we reflect on the roles of women, I also want to urge us to dignify women, to give them hope for tomorrow. And in saying this, I want to close by saying these are our colors. I'm wearing them now. Our colors are purple. Purple stands for justice and dignity. We look at green, which is for hope. And I have specks of white here. White is for purity. But I want to look at my white as peace. Can we give them the peace? Because basically, women are the suffering end of anything that has to come against the way of peace. In conflicts, women suffer the most. They are looking at after children, they're watching their children die. They are victims of rape. They are victims of gender molestation. This also happens in workplaces anyway. We're going to be looking at all those issues, workplace issues for women as well, sexism, gender disparity, discrimination, and all that. So even as we reflect, it's our hope that we'll join hands together, as I said earlier, to bring an end to this. Thank you very much, and I hope you're going to be joining me next time for my next podcast. Thank you. Have a nice day.